Okay, hello everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time today to join us in Publicize's webinar. We're super happy to have former Editor-in-Chief Dylan Tweney here as our guest. Dylan's career in tech journalism spans 2 decades, and he's been a driving force behind growth at publications including VentureBeat and Wired, where he was also a senior editor. He's been featured as an expert correspondent on Bloomberg, Fox, MSNBC, and This Week in Tech, just to name a few, and has run the gamut of topics, including chatting with comedian Dennis Miller about the feasibility of putting porno on a PSP, as well as more serious conversations about how VentureBeat and the Harvard Business Review achieve growth online. Since stepping down as editor-in-chief at VentureBeat in July, Dylan has launched Tweney Media, a content strategy and creation agency helping businesses tell their stories through blog posts, video, audio, and much more. He has a popular newsletter, The Tweney Report, that covers the tech industry. If you'd like to sign up for the newsletter or get more information about Tweney Media, Publicize would be happy to provide, or you could visit tweney.media. In a goodbye letter to VentureBeat, Dylan wrote, quote, "One of the things I've enjoyed most about being here at VentureBeat is the opportunity I have to talk with investors and startups, learn about their technologies, talk with their founders, and then tell their stories," end quote. It is this passion for the startup culture that makes Dylan the perfect guest for today's webinar about the importance of guest articles for startups. Just a quick note, we will be taking about 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for questions. So be sure to take notes at the very end and have any in mind. Dylan, let's get right into it. We have an audience full of entrepreneurs, and you did a very entrepreneurial thing yourself by leaving VentureBeat and starting your own company. So maybe you could tell us what was the reasoning behind that?
Well, thanks for that awesome introduction. It was really, really nice of you, Jim. Basically, my impetus was this. I had a long career in journalism. I felt like I'd kind of accomplished a lot of things that I wanted to do. But I was ready for a new challenge, and I was ready, frankly, to do something where I was not beholden to the kind of daily news cycle. It's a really aggressive, fast, difficult business right now. The business models for daily news mean that you basically have to move really, really, really quickly to publish as much as you can. And that makes it hard to find the time to dive in deeply. It's you're always fighting. And, I was always fighting for my writers on my news team so that they would have the space to do feature stories and really in-depth stories, delving into how a startup came to be or what the future prospects of a particular technology were or something like that. And it's really hard to make space for that. Like, you always have to balance that with the kind of need to cover daily breaking news. And I was also ready to be kind of more entrepreneurial, like you say, and be more in charge of my day-to-day, business. I'm seeing some comments saying that the stream is unable to connect. Do you know, are people actually able to hear me, Jim?
I can hear you loud and clear. Let me, it looks like some people are. Let me tell, if you can't hear, if you can go ahead and try to leave the browser and come back in with the same link, that should fix it.
Okay, so close your browser and then reopen it with the same link. It should work. I had a little difficulty connecting too when we were doing a test run here, and that actually helped a lot.
Okay, well, thank you. Actually, Dylan, I wanted to stop you here and say, so you mentioned that kind of being a slave to the news cycle, or that was just draining, and it's
really rewarding, but it's draining. Yes,
right. And I find it quite funny that you chose to be an entrepreneur, which I also see. I work with many, and I feel like that's quite a draining job as well. So out of the two, which one's more stressful?
Well, it's a different kind of stress. I think, first of all, there are different ways of being an entrepreneur, right? I'm not trying to be, Tweeny Media is never going to be a venture funded, rapid growth technology company, right? So I don't have that kind of pressure of trying to raise money. I have a different kind of pressure, which is to find clients and then to do great work for them and convince them that what I'm doing is worth re-upping so that I can retain the clients, right? And then I have the pressure of trying to figure out how to grow on revenues, right? So it's a bootstrapped company. So as I grow, I need to find talented other writers to bring in, writers and editors and video producers and so forth to bring in to help me, so that I'm not doing all of it. And just negotiating that whole thing is stressful. But I would say the stress is like, it's a more intrinsic kind of stress. Like you're not stressed about oh my God, I've got the weekly meeting, the sixth of, several regularly scheduled weekly meetings that I've got to go to. Like, it's like, oh, I have to figure out how to do everything and cover Facebook F8 this week, or not the stress of like, oh man, I wish I had more resources to do this, and like the boss isn't giving me that, right? It's more stress like, I've decided to do this thing. Like I've decided to start this company and turn what I do into a business. And the stress is more like, am I going to be able to make that happen? Or is this something that I really want to do? Maybe I want to take a different approach to, how I run this week. So it's a different kind of stress. I find it more a healthier kind of stress. Because I brought this on myself, right?
Right.
It's my choice. So just to finish my story really quickly, I realized that what I had done as a journalist was still really valuable. And I actually believe that what I'm doing now is not journalism. And I don't want to denigrate journalism's value. It's just that the business of journalism is changing, and it's really hard to make a good business out of journalism, in a pure sense, but it's still really valuable. But apart from that, the skills that I learned over a couple decades of doing journalism, storytelling, interviewing people, learning how to put together a story about complicated technology or a complicated business model in a way that is engaging and connects with people. Those are skills that are useful to other people. And in fact, there's demand for it. There's a lot of companies out there that want to tell their stories and are finding that, because of the same problem that I found in journalism, that there's just not, journalists aren't able to go into the same depth maybe as they used to be, or as people would like them to be. There's a lot more, a lot more to be told that is not getting covered in news stories. So you might be a startup with an amazing technology. You'll get covered when you raise funding or when you launch your product, if you're lucky, but you won't get the kind of in-depth coverage that you would like to get out there. And in fact, there are people out there who would like to read more about you. They want to know all the nitty-gritty of your technology. They want to know how it works. They want to know, details about how to implement it. They want to know the background of your company. They want to know the advantages and the disadvantages, and they want to hear stories about people who used it successfully so they can help figure out if it's something that's for them or not. So all of those are stories that you're unlikely to get unless you're really gigantic like Google, or you're really super hyped like Slack. You're unlikely as a startup to get, or even as a medium stage company, to get any journalist to cover those stories in the kind of depth that you and your customers or potential customers would like. So that's where content, we call it content marketing of sorts, or thought leadership. Like that's where that comes in. And that's what my business is now, is helping companies tell their own stories.
And was that something that you saw, that you really felt, hey, I think that this is needed, this going more in depth into what a company does, instead of just maybe following a news cycle and doing a brief write-up of a company? I mean, and we need to have the background information as well. Is that what you were trying to come in and replace and get?
I mean, I think of it as supplementing more than replacing, but yes, I mean, I think that I've seen that trend coming for a very long time. you could see it first in, in science journalism,
Mm-hmm.
where there are very few science journalists anymore, right? All the major newspapers have let go of their science reporting teams. Like there's a few people left at, space.com, and there's some science reporters at the New Yorker and, Slate. Here and there, there's a couple science reporters who do great work. But, and I'm just talking about the US English language media right now, but there aren't nearly enough science reporters to cover all the science that's out there. So you saw like universities doing great work, like Stanford did this really well. They've got tons of great news to report, but nobody's out there covering it. So Stanford started writing news stories, news feature stories. Instead of issuing press releases, they would write these feature stories that had great headlines, great leads, often, told a story in a really easy to read way. They would quote people. Sometimes they'd quote people outside Stanford, like outside experts.
Mm-hmm.
It was still a public relations function. They weren't quoting competitors. They weren't writing a fully balanced story. But the story was extremely well written and informative and useful. And they were doing it, in the same style that a science journalist would have done 10 years ago. So I saw that start to happen, 5 or 10 years ago in science journalism. It is now happening in technology journalism as well, where you see
Mm-hmm.
a lot of tech companies, instead of, or maybe in addition to pitching their story to a bunch of reporters, they also publish a blog post. Maybe they publish something on Medium that goes in depth about, how a particular feature came about, or what they're trying to do with their hiring strategy or their diversity strategy or something like that. So they can go directly to the world and tell their own stories through
Right.
platforms like Medium or LinkedIn or their own blogs.
Yeah, and some of those are hugely successful. I mean, you look at Moz or HubSpot, and it's almost like a go-to place for that kind of information. So, yeah, it makes complete sense. Really quick, a quick shout out to a colleague of mine, Andrew White, who was a science journalist in Brisbane, Australia. They are few and far between these days, unfortunately. Really quick, let's jump into a couple of things that have to do with guest posts, thought leadership. So if you could answer, what are the benefits of being considered a thought leader or an expert or a guru or whatever you want to call it in an industry?
Well, okay, so the main benefit, the first main benefit of being regarded as a thought leader, or, let's just say thought leader is a placeholder for somebody who says things that people think are interesting enough to listen to and comment on. There's no like thought leader badge or certificate from the Thought Leader Academy. But so the benefits of being recognized like that, first of all, are just name recognition, right? There's awareness. If you're a startup or you're a founder of a startup and you have thoughts that, you are able to write things or publish things, or you have a podcast or something that is interesting enough that it starts to attract people who want to listen to it or watch it or read it and then share it with their friends. That's an enormous kind of built-in public relations benefit, because that helps promote you and your company right from the start. So that awareness is really useful. The second potential value is I think relationship building and community. Like as people start to listen to you and follow you, they will also respond to you and comment and kind of participate with what you're publishing. And if you're doing it right, you'll be listening to that, reading that, and responding to them. And that gives you a whole feedback channel and a level of interactivity with an audience. Maybe it's an audience of your customers. Maybe it's an audience of other people in Silicon Valley or in the tech industry in your country. But it plugs you in to a community in a way that I think is really beneficial to you professionally and as an entrepreneur. And then the third reason, so the first two, awareness of you and your company, plugging into community and relationships. And then I think the third reason is that you have the potential to influence the conversation around certain topics. You can get your point of view out there. You can get your terminology out there. You can get your way of thinking about problems and solutions out there. And that's very useful from a kind of strategic marketing perspective. If you're HubSpot, for instance, and your business is marketing automation, but a lot of that is driven by content marketing, and you are recognized as an expert in content marketing, and you help make the term content marketing popular, then that's immensely valuable, because then you're at the center of that conversation. You've helped set the terminology, and you're regarded as a major player in it. So that's very strategic, as well as just awareness and relationship building.
A couple of points that I wanted to run by is that you mentioned a lot about content marketing and blogging and kind of building the narrative around your company. And I was wondering if you could tell me, is there an impact between creating, or a difference in impact, I guess, between creating a steady content stream on your own blog or getting a guest article published on a major publication like a Forbes or Fortune or something like that?
Right. Well, there's a huge difference. I mean, first of all, to get published on Fortune or Forbes or VentureBeat or TechCrunch, you have to get past the gatekeepers. And what the gatekeepers are going to be looking for is content or an article that is thought-provoking, informative, interesting, and well-written, but also not self-promotional. They want content that's not like, we've discovered, I don't know. An example would be like, if you're a security company, you provide security for mobile phones. You write a story that's all about how mobile phones are, smartphones are under threat from all kinds of malware and phishing attacks and viruses and things like that. The editor's going to look at that and say, oh, well, you sell a security solution for mobiles. This is all just a setup for showing how valuable your solution is. They're not going to like that. On the other hand, if you have something thoughtful to say that's not directly self-promotional, like, here's how we started our company, or here's an interesting way that we organize our sales team, or maybe here's something about the future of mobile technology that you never considered, which is not directly security related, but might be tangential to that somehow. That has a better chance of getting past the gatekeepers. The benefit of that then is that you reach their audience, which is almost certainly going to be larger than the audience you have on your own blog or your own Medium publication. It's probably going to have a very different makeup, right? So like the demographics of a Forbes audience or an Inc. audience are going to be different from that of a TechCrunch audience, or a New York Times, right? Or a Washington Post. So the demographics will make a big difference in terms of who you're trying to reach. So I would say if you have something that's more self-promotional or that's more about touting your product, then that's a candidate for your own blog or for a PR campaign. If you have something that's more general interest, that's what we would call kind of a classic thought leadership, where it's provocative in terms of ideas but not promotional of your own stuff. That's going to be a better candidate for pitching to publications as a guest post or an op-ed.
Okay. I think I'm going to ask you to put on your gatekeeper hat a little bit later, and we can talk about some of those, differences in what's too promotional.
Okay.
Cool. But maybe let's take a step back, and can you just take 10 seconds and actually explain what a guest article is for anybody that's listening that doesn't know?
Sure. So publications like VentureBeat, where I used to work, will publish, dozens and dozens of news stories every day written by their own staff, their own reporters. In addition to that, they publish two other kinds of articles, most of them. One is a sponsored post, which is basically it's paid for by an advertiser. It's subject to some limitations, but maybe is more promotional of that advertiser, and it's usually disclosed. It says sponsored post or promoted post or something like that at the top. And that means that the advertiser paid to have that story appear in the same stream of news stories with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Then the third type is the guest post or the guest article, which is something that is not written by somebody on staff. It's written by somebody outside, an entrepreneur or a venture capitalist or some other interested party. But they didn't pay to place it there. They sent it into the editors. The editors said, oh, hey, this is really interesting. We'd love to publish this. And it appears with the author's name and probably has a link to your site, which is great for awareness and SEO and possibly traffic. But primarily it's about getting your ideas out there and becoming part of the discussion. Guest articles are usually 600 to 800 words. Sometimes they can be a little bit longer, up to 1,000 maybe. And like I said, they're not too self-promotional. And a lot of publications will publish their guidelines for how, what they're looking for in guest posts. In fact, I'll post the URL of VentureBeat's guest article guideline page, so you can take a look at that.
Awesome. That would be fantastic. That brings something up that I was going to ask later, but can you tell us the difference between a native ad, what a native ad is, first of all, native advertising, content marketing, and guest articles?
Okay, so native advertising refers to any kind of advertising that appears within the native content stream of an app or a publication or something like that. So the classic example would be like you're looking at Twitter, and as you scroll through Twitter, there are things that look exactly like tweets, but they're ads from Twitter advertisers. Or in Instagram, they're promoted Instagram posts, or in Tumblr promoted posts, right? Native advertising on a news site refers to a similar idea, which is that it looks like a news story, a news article, or a feature article in the content stream, but it's actually paid for. It's been placed there. So there's not a strict difference between sponsored posts and native ads in the news business. Some people use this one term and some people use the other.
Okay.
Sometimes native advertising in the news business can also, and the advertising on media business can also encompass more ambitious things like a microsite, which is, say IBM wants to reach an audience of readers on Mashable, for instance. So they could place, a couple articles within, Mashable's news stream, or, maybe they create a whole sub-site on a particular topic like virtual reality, all about virtual reality, brought to you by IBM on Mashable. And it has its own kind of sub homepage. It's got its own kind of look, a whole bunch of different articles. That could be considered native advertising as well. There was another term you were asking about.
Content marketing. Yes, sir.
Right. So content marketing in general just refers to the use of content, stories, podcasts, video, infographics, things that people actually want to read or look at or consume from a media, using that to help drive interest in your company. I think of it as falling into two rough, general, large categories. One is the kind of more high-end thought leadership type content, which is aimed at building awareness and putting your company in the center of discussion for a particular topic. And then there's kind of more tactical lead gen or SEO oriented content marketing, which is typically, HubSpot does a lot of this. They just, have lots and lots of blog posts on particular topics. And the goal is to drive traffic to those posts, drive traffic to the HubSpot blog, and then ultimately get people to, sign up, right? Yeah. Fill out a form so that they get in the sales funnel.
Right.
So that's much more goal-directed, purposeful kind of content, whereas the thought leadership stuff is, you could view that as being at the very top of the funnel, the sort of let's just get aware of who this company is and what they're doing. But it doesn't necessarily tie directly into lead gen or SEO metrics in a meaningful way.
Okay, excellent. Let me put on a entrepreneur hat and ask you a couple of questions um, about about the best way to go about guest posting. So first of all, as a founder, where should my article come from? And should I be paying special attention to current events, or should I rely more on my past experiences?
What do you mean by where should your article come from?
Where would an idea for an article come from? If I want to, let's say I want to get a post on VentureBeat,
Right.
where should I start thinking about what would be good to write?
So current news events in the technology world or in whatever industry you're in are probably the best place to start. So if you happen to know that people are talking about a particular topic, or that, in tech, like this week it's F8, right? Now might be, well, let's use F8 as an example, Facebook's big conference, right? They just had all these announcements earlier this week. And one of the things they talked about that was a really big deal is VR, virtual reality, and how they're going to be using VR for social purposes or something like that. So suppose you're an entrepreneur and you have some kind of social networking, social media enhancing app. You're like, okay, I know people are talking about VR, and Facebook has made some effort to tie this to social media, and maybe we're all going to be doing social networking in virtual reality in 5 years.
God
Right.
help us.
So, right, exactly. I'll have a big mask on like this, so you won't be able to do that. So maybe then you think about, like, you want to think about, okay, that's a news topic that everybody's talking about, and that's because it's topical. That's what editors are going to be. That's one of the things editors are going to be interested in. So then you think, what do I know about that could relate to that, where I have something interesting to say? Do I have a unique take on social media? Do I have a unique take on VR? How, maybe I've tested out all the different kinds of VR headsets that are out there, and I know I can say something about, like, how Oculus there's no way they're going to do this because somebody else's tech blows them away. Or maybe I know enough about the dynamics of social media that I can say, like, people are unlikely to go for this. Or maybe I can extend it and say, not only social networking, but I think we're all going to be doing work in VR, and here's what it might look like, right? So you have to start brainstorming about ideas that can connect things that you're an expert in with things that people are talking about. And that's generally a good place to start generating ideas for guest posts.
Okay, thank you. What are 3 things that should be left out of every guest post?
Okay, so I would say the first thing to leave out is direct promotion and direct mention of your company. Sometimes you can get away with it, and you should not try to hide that your company has an interest in something. You'll need to disclose that to the editor, because they don't want to feel like, if you're a reseller of a particular product and then you talk dirt about all their competitors, right? You want to let, and this is a true story, this has actually happened to us, you want to let the editors know that you have an involvement with a company that competes with, or that you're mentioning in your story. You want to be transparent about that.
What happened in this particular instance? Did you take a editorial stand and say, we're not publishing this, or how did that come about? Did you find out after you published that?
We found out after we published it, because the guy did not disclose his relationship with one of the companies. He gave us a story that was a survey of a bunch of companies in a particular market category. And we're like, this seems pretty smart. And then it later turned out, somebody let us know, like, oh, hey, by the way, this guy actually has a reseller relationship with one of those companies. And we're like, really? We did not know that. So we had to go back and publish a disclaimer on his story after the fact. And we were pretty pissed that he had done that.
Yeah. So
you don't want to hide the fact that you have an interest in something that you're talking about. But generally, you want to leave it out of the main story, right? You don't want to promote your story. So that's one thing to leave out. Um, that's probably the most important thing to leave out is the like, by the way, our company is an incredible solution for this problem that I'm talking about, or something like that, right? You want to leave that out. A lot of writers who aren't professional, who don't do it every day, often feel like they need to do we get a lot of stories that have very long-winded wind-ups, right? They're just like, imagine one day you're like, or one day I was sitting at the grocery, standing in the grocery store line, like these things that kind of take a long time to get to the point.
Mm-hmm.
So leave out the long-winded wind-up, just get right to the point.
A quick check of the inverted pyramid.
Exactly.
Google it, and before you write, look at that.
Exactly. Start with the most important thing. Put that right at the top.
Okay, cool. And the third thing that you want to leave out.
The third thing that you want to leave out. That's a really good question. I'm not sure I can think of a third thing off the top of my head. I would say leave out excessive jargon. Like if you, people have a tendency to assume that, because they're really familiar with the field, they tend, if they're an investment banker or a venture capitalist, they leave in all kinds of technical terms relating to finance. If they're, an agriculture startup, they leave in all kinds of agricultural terms. Like, you want to leave out the jargon, and just keep in mind that the audience that you're writing for is probably an awful lot more general than the people that you deal with every day.
Great. You mentioned one particular guest article that was submitted that left a sour taste in your mouth. But is there a guest article that you remember publishing during your time at VentureBeat when you were like, man, this is really great. We're really happy to have this. And could you tell us maybe some qualities that appeared in this guest article?
Yeah. So I'm going to look it up so I can give you guys the URL.
Awesome.
I think the title was "Hardware is Dead." It was a really provocative story from a guy who worked in the mobile industry and kind of knew a lot about production of hardware in China. And it was basically a story. Oh, great. I found it. The formatting looks a little funky for some reason, but I'm going to share it. It's from 2012. So the guy said, basically I go to China every 4 or 5 months for work, and I have to visit all these corporate headquarters and manufacturing areas. But I walked, down this one road in Shenzhen where there's a lot of manufacturers of different kinds of electronics, budget electronics. And he found that people were selling, Android phones for $100, tablets for $150. And then he actually found one of the tablets or something like that for $45. And he was like, oh my God, what this means is that the Chinese factories have gotten so efficient at making things that are almost as good as everything else that they can now sell them for, $45. There's no longer any profit margin in the hardware business. It's all going to go to these super cheap Chinese manufacturers. It's all over. It was really successful for one thing. It got widely read and widely shared, partly because it was really provocative. But the guy backed it up. He knew the industry. He backed it up with some vivid anecdote about, walking through this market in China and discovering the super cheap tablet. So it was informed and interesting, and it took a strong stand. Agree with it or not? I'm not sure I do agree with it, but it took a really strong stand, and it if you disagree with it, the burden is on you to show why, because he brought such a smart level of knowledge of the field to it.
In that headline, I mean, it's quite a shocking headline. Hardware is dead. Do you have to take that sort of controversial stance every time, or is it more about the substance of your argument that you can back it up?
Yeah, I think it's more about the substance.
Substance. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. It is. It's more about the substance. Like, if you don't have a provocative point of view, don't force it. I think that provocative is great if you have something that's controversial and you can back it up, and you don't mind making the argument. But it's also possible for a post to be very useful, practical, pragmatic, right? It gives you something that you can take away and use. Like, here's how I conquered my inbox, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's how we succeeded in hiring the most talented engineers, even though, we don't have Google's budget. Here's a methodology that we've discovered for doing product development on, in a 5-day sprint that works really well, right? These are all examples of stories that aren't necessarily provocative or controversial, but they could be very useful to people.
Okay, great. So maybe kind of a takeaway is know your audience and make sure that when you're writing a story, your audience is going to walk away with something that they can action or something that's of use.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I like that way
Okay.
of putting it.
Okay. During your stint at VentureBeat, you quadrupled the audience to 6.5 million monthly visitors. What editorial decisions contributed to that growth? And how, if at all, did contributed content spur it?
I think, the main decisions that contributed to that growth had to do with hiring, bringing on people who were really good writers, really good reporters, and who could kind of crank out great copy day after day after day and build relationships with people in the industry and just do great reporting. So that's some of it. I think I don't recall the exact number. Contributed content was probably maybe 5%. Maybe on a good month 10% if we had something really blow up of our overall traffic. So it was not a huge proportion of the traffic. That's not to say it couldn't be. There are publications like Forbes, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
or Huffington Post for that matter, for which contributed content is an enormous part of their strategy. It just didn't turn out. That wasn't a major focus for us at VentureBeat at the time.
Okay. You wrote a piece about a year back about entrepreneurs and their dependence on open platforms like Amazon Web Services and Google Drive. And in that, you also mentioned content creators and their dependence on Google search. At VentureBeat, was optimizing for Google taken into consideration in the overall process? And if so, how? And how can this translate to an entrepreneur that's looking for a good guest article topic or content marketing topic?
Right. So VentureBeat definitely took that into account. We did SEO optimization, mostly from a technical point of view, although to a certain extent also in terms of content. So look, I'm not an SEO expert. I can't, I know a bit about it, but I can't go in and troubleshoot and solve problems for your site. So I think SEO optimization can be very effective from a technical point of view. If you've got a site that, you're not publishing titles correctly, or something about your site architecture is off, and so that Google is not indexing it properly, you need to take care of that. That's a really important thing. I think as a writer, you need to know a little bit about SEO in order to write effectively, and how much you want to include this in your writing strategy and your day-to-day tactics is up to you. But very often it can be helpful to think what's the audience I'm trying to reach, or what are the keywords that I'm trying to hit with this particular story, and make sure that those keywords are included in the story several times, preferably near the top. And maybe they should probably find their way into the headline, the title as well. But I don't think you should take it too far unless you're writing the kind of copy that I was describing earlier, the content marketing copy that's aimed directly at SEO and lead gen. And if you're doing that, you're producing, multiple posts, certainly per week, if not per day. And you need to have a fairly high frequency of content generation. I think in most cases, though, the best SEO comes from actually writing stuff that humans want to read. So humans are your primary audience. You're writing for people's eyes and their minds. And if you write stuff that people want to read, and if they enjoy reading it, if they get out of it what the headline promised they would get out of it, then they will like that. They will link to it. They will share it on Twitter. They will share it on Facebook, especially if you make it easy for them to share with, little pop-up buttons that let people share with a button click or two. People will share, and that's really where the SEO comes from, I think, more than writing for an algorithm. Now, the exception, of course, is if you have a strategy, like, we need to hit these 20 keywords this week, and then next week we're going to have another slate of keywords that we need to hit. Then you approach writing in a little bit of a different way. But for the most part, get the SEO straight from a technical point of view. Make sure your site is architected properly and that it's delivering the right metadata with every page and so forth. And then write your content for humans.
And as a writer, how do you think the whole writing for SEO has impacted? I mean, do you have a negative look at that kind of writing?
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of do, because I think there's a lot of crap out there, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of content that is just, you search for how to do something, like how to, I don't know, how to paint a window frame, or how to change the oil in your car. That's a terrible example, but how to, you search for, like, how to create a list in HTML, or how to optimize CSS, right? For do a background in CSS. Like, you see all kinds of crap content come up, which is totally SEO optimized. They're just trying to get to the top of Google search rankings. That works less well than it used to because of the Google Panda update that they did a couple of years ago. It pushed down a lot of the content farm, the worst of that kind of content. So it doesn't show up so high on search results anymore. But I think there's still a lingering effect from that, which is that there is just crap content out there, which it's too long, it's not well organized, it's too repetitive, it's not original, it's not interesting to read. And that's because it wasn't written for a human. Yeah, it wasn't. It wasn't like, nobody sat down and thought, like, what would I like to read, or how would this help me most? They sat down and they thought, how can we make Google rank this highly? And and it doesn't turn out very well, in my opinion. And I think, that may work in the short term, but I don't think that's going to work in terms of your long-term branding or your long-term, the people valuing what you produce and wanting to hear what you say.
Yeah, understandable. And I guess my heart aches a little bit for the people that have to write that content, because over and over, it's got to hurt a little.
Yeah.
Okay, so a good takeaway is remember that you're writing for humans and know your audience, and then your content will be looked at above the rest.
I think so.
I'm not sure if you've already kind of touched on this, or if you even have an answer. But what are the most important elements you make sure are included in every guest article, or what's a secret recipe of things that should be included in each guest post, no matter what the topic?
I don't know if I have a secret recipe for the post itself. I mean, I think
Dylan, we're counting on you, man.
I'm gonna spin a couple things off the top of my head here. I think you need a compelling headline, and you don't actually need to figure out the headline that it's actually going to run with. You could probably submit a couple of different ideas. Editors don't mind that, because it helps them come up with ideas. They may reject everything that you write, but if you have something catchy that gets the editor's attention, that goes a long way. You want a nice short intro, what we call in the news business a lead. And this goes back to what I said. It's like, leave off that long-winded, chatty wind-up. But get right to the point and make it kind of catchy, so that you can tell from reading the first paragraph or two. And short paragraphs, the first short paragraph or two, make it so that you can kind of get an idea of what the story is about. You want to make sure to include an anecdote, a really good real world example, because that goes a long way in a guest post. And I think also you want to make sure that you include a short author bio at the end. So, so-and-so is the founder and CEO of XYZ widgets company. And before starting the company in 2012, she was, a director of research at Microsoft or something like that. So like a 2 or 3 sentence, very short bio, include a link to your company, on the company name, because that'll generally get through. But you want to make sure that you include that when you submit it, because every editor is going to ask for that.
I know you tried an experiment at VentureBeat when you were hiring writers, and you did a blind writing test. But for guest articles, was that something you implemented, or how important was the author's social proof when considering whether or not you would publish a guest article, like a Microsoft executive versus a recent college graduate?
Right. To a certain extent, there still is a little bit of a blind submission process for guest posts. If you go to that at VentureBeat, that guest post URL that I posted a few minutes ago, you'll see that there's a form there that you can fill out to submit a post. And if you do that, it'll go right to the editor, the op-ed editor, Mo Marshall at VentureBeat is the one. It'll go right to her, and she'll just get it in a format that lets her look right at the text. She, probably will pay far more attention, as I did when I got them, to the words, right, rather than the name and the social proof. But I'll be honest, in guest posts in particular, more so than for hiring a person, the name of a person really does matter, right? It lends weight in the reader's mind, because a guest post is not just a news story. You're not just conveying facts or trying to tell a story about what happened. In a guest post, you're taking a point of view, and you're also putting your expertise on the line. So if you have a reputation, if you have expertise, if you have a name, that's kind of part of the package. So I think it is important, if you have a substantial background, to point that out in your pitch when you send the email to the editor who you want to consider it. If you don't have that kind of background, you're a recent college graduate, then just sell the hell out of the story. If it's good enough, they'll run it, right?
Right for humans. Remember that.
Yeah.
Okay. I have just a couple of questions left, and then we can open it up for the audience. But I wanted to get back to the promotional part of things, and ask a couple of questions. First of all, what criteria did VentureBeat editors use to decide if an article was too promotional? And then I also want to ask, can I be over promotional of my industry, not just my company? Like I recently read a magazine post about the importance of effective content marketing by a rep from a content marketing company. So is there a boundary there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a formula that we use or that editors at any publication use. It's probably more of a gut check.
Okay.
But basically, if it feels like it's touting your company, or if it feels like a big setup of a problem that your company solves, then that's going to feel too self-promotional, and they're quite likely to deny it. The same thing could happen with, it's a really interesting question about being too promotional of an industry. The same thing could happen, but I've seen it go both ways. Sometimes those posts get through, and sometimes they get rejected, and it can sometimes just be down to the personality of the editor, or how well written the story was, or just how it seemed to that editor on that particular day. So I don't think there's a science to it. I mean, and the other thing is, what gets rejected by one publication might get accepted by another. So it can be worth trying again, if you don't succeed the first time.
And a quick note, you should probably pitch one publication at a time. Is that correct? If you were an editor, you wouldn't want TechCrunch publishing the exact same guest post a couple days after yours or on the same day.
Absolutely, that'd be really bad. Yeah, you want to pitch one at a time.
Okay, fantastic. My last question, and I kind of wanted to go. I really value your opinion here, so I want to say, what is the impact of guest articles on journalism? In your opinion, do guest articles improve or detract from the overall quality of journalism, of media?
Well, in a way, they're the same kind of thing that newspapers have been doing for decades, which is the op-ed, right? It's the opinion piece from somebody who's not a journalist that manages to get published in the op-ed pages of the New York Times or the San Francisco Chronicle or or the Wall Street Journal, or what have you. So they're the same kind of thing. I don't think it's that new. Maybe they're used more often than they used to be, but I think the impact overall is good. What they do is they add voices and they add expertise that that publications don't have on their own, right? For the most part, reporters are not themselves entrepreneurs, or they haven't been venture capitalists, right? They aren't semiconductor engineers. They aren't, HR recruiters. So like those kinds of perspectives can add depth and information and voices that you couldn't get directly from the reporting staff of a publication. And I think that's a great addition.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, we have about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to open up for some questions. We're going to give this a try. I'd like to see if maybe we can invite some people on screen to talk, to do their
there were a couple
to do their question
stream already too in the chat window here. Can I answer these really quickly?
Oh yeah, actually, yeah, that's what I was going to do. I was going to see if Alexandra might want to come on and talk. Cool. But if you're listening, Alexandra, if you'd like, would you like me to invite you on the screen? Same goes for Miles as well. Just go ahead and type yes. I'll wait 15 seconds, and if I don't hear anything, we'll just go straight into the question. All right, we'll go to the question. Let's do that. So Alexandra had the question. I wanted to do a guest article about the Y Combinator Female Founders Conference, April 4th. Is it too late? Should we be doing the submission same day, next day?
So yeah, I mean, ideally you want to get something in either ahead of time, or if it's based on something that just happened, you have a reaction the same day or the next day. Because the further you get away, the next day is like, okay, we could do a next day reaction story. 2 days later, okay, we could still do a reaction story. A week later, it's going to have to kind of restart the conversation, right? To the extent that people were talking on, say, TechCrunch about the YC Female Founders Conference, they're probably, if they were talking about it on April 4th and 5th, they probably aren't talking about it now. So you can still use it as a jumping off point, but it's a different article because you have to kind of say, you have to restart the conversation about female entrepreneurship or the challenges that women face in Silicon Valley or what have you. You can't just say in the way that you could like on April 5th, like yesterday at the YC Female Founders Conference, XYZ happened. And so you have to do a little more work. So sooner is generally better, but it doesn't close the window entirely.
Does that timeliness give you a leg up?
I think so, yeah, because editors are always looking for things that are timely, that people are talking about, right? So that helps a lot. If you can turn around something right away and get it in, then it's much more effective than if it's just coming out of the blue and is unrelated to anything that's going on at the moment. Okay,
great. Craig had a question, and I think I'm going to add a little bit to his question as well. First of all, how did you react when you got a a pitch that didn't have a draft included? If they said, "Hey, I'd like to write about this topic, would you be interested?" How did you react to that?
So I'm not a, so some people will pitch abstracts, right? They'll send a
Mm-hmm.
one paragraph summary of what they'd like to write. And I'd almost always ask, like, just send me the article, because
Mm-hmm.
I can't really decide based on the abstract. I can't make a decision. The only thing you're likely to get from the abstract is a no, like, oh, we've already written the story on that. But sometimes, you write something interesting enough or novel enough, and maybe it'll get through. So I kind of think that it's not worth sending the abstract. You should really just send the article, because I
Okay.
want to see it. If I'm interested, I want to see the article, and it basically comes down to how the article is written anyway, not the one paragraph summary of it. I can't. That's what I'm making a decision on, is the article itself. So I would send the whole article.
Okay. And what about pitching multiple articles within the same pitch? Is that something
Right.
that?
That's kind of annoying, because it's sort of hard to deal with multiple things in a single email. It's like,
Mhm.
it's easy to lose track of things. It's easier to have like one idea per thread, and it's probably better not to overwhelm the editors with too many requests from you at the same time, right? So yeah, spread them out.
That's a great point. What is good time to spread out?
Wait until you get a response from somebody, and then say, okay, you didn't like that. How about this one? I have another one. Or come back to them the next day and say, I hear what you say about that. If you can show that you've responded, if the editor has given you any feedback, sometimes they just say, no, thank you, it's not for us.
Mhm.
But if they've given you any feedback and you can show that you've responded, that really helps.
And we've asked this several times of journalists. Say I'm pitching a press release announcement, and we've asked, journalists, what's a good time frame to wait until I send a follow up? But maybe since guest posts aren't as pressing,
Right.
if it's not a timely thing, what's a good time frame to wait?
Right. Unless there's some really critical pressing story or news event that's happening that you need to be on top of them for, I would say follow up in a couple days, 2 or 3 days, something like that. And if they still don't respond, follow up on maybe the fifth day and say, look, I haven't heard back from you, so I'm going to assume that you're not interested in it, unless you let me know by the end of today.
Okay.
So give each editor maybe 3 to 5 days to consider. Let them know when you're withdrawing it and you're going to send it to somebody else. But polite follow-ups are totally fine.
Okay, fantastic. Miles has a really good question. I think a lot of founders tend to focus on the big names, TechCrunch and VentureBeat. But maybe if you don't have as much social proof, what would it make sense to pitch to smaller media sources? And the theory being that big media don't want to be first on like non-hard news content.
Yeah, I think it probably makes more sense to pitch the smaller outlets first. First of all, there's going to be a lower bar. It'll be easier to get into them, uh, assuming that you have something that's reasonably well written and interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and up their alley, right? Focused on whatever they're focused on. They're
Mm-hmm.
probably hungrier for content than the big blogs are too, because they're getting fewer guest posts. They probably have smaller staffs, so they probably want more help to fill out their slate of content of posts per day. So I would say, yeah, start with a smaller post. The other thing is you'll get some practice, if you haven't ever been published by a big publication before. You'll get some practice working with editors, getting feedback, seeing what works and what doesn't. And you'll learn a lot from that. That'll serve you well, and then that'll give you some of that social proof and some of that publication record when you go to
Definitely. And I think also it might help you better focus on your target audience. I know we had a guest post that we were pitching, that, the client of ours was really, really hoping for a VentureBeat, a TechCrunch, and it just didn't get there, but it did get on a smaller site. I think it was called InfoQ, and the traffic from that, it was a post about Internet of Things, and they actually got 3 leads to to their business from that, so like I think that the people that are reading those smaller, maybe niche sites are really more focused, and they might be the type of customer you're actually looking for.
See, that's a really interesting point. Don't be overly focused on the size of the audience. And actually, VentureBeat has a really big audience, right? But it's smaller than TechCrunch is. So TechCrunch reaches more people. It's kind of buzzier. All the startups want to launch in TechCrunch, but I heard multiple times, I would hear anecdotes from people. They would give a story to TechCrunch, and then they would give a story to us. In fact, one guy went so far as he had a series of guest posts, and he sent some of them to TechCrunch and some of them to us, and then he would track the traffic and the social shares and things like that, and the outcomes for each of them. And he shared some of that data with me. And what it turned out was he got a lot more traffic from TechCrunch because their audience is bigger, but he got a lot more relevant traffic from VentureBeat. So there'd be fewer overall click-throughs, but there'd be a lot more, follow-ups from potential customers or inquiries from venture capitalists that he cared about when it was covered on VentureBeat than on TechCrunch. So it's the same kind of thing you're talking about, where, the smaller site might actually be better suited to your purposes if it reaches the audience you want, and that audience is more engaged. So you got to think about what your goals are, right? You want engagement. You want people to reach out to you who might be customers. You want, investors to recognize who you are, right? So it's not all about, getting 10,000 or 50,000 page views, right? It's not about the 7,000 social shares. It's about the outcomes that you want with the people that you actually want to notice you.
All right, thanks. Dylan, I know we're 2 minutes over and we have 2 questions left. I was wondering if you might stick around for a couple more minutes to answer these.
Yeah, let's do those 2 questions before we go.
All right, I really appreciate that. From Rob, what strategies have you seen be successful to get views, shares, comments around the first infographic or first blog post? So how do you really spark off your blog?
So that's difficult. I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about a first blog post on your own blog, right? Or the first infographic that you send out there.
I think that's what he's saying. Yeah. And
so,
you can't put Kim Kardashian on the cover either.
Right. Exactly. So this is tough. This is where it comes down to distribution and promotion, right? Once you publish something, or even if you get somebody to publish something in their blog, or you get an infographic out there and you get somebody to republish it in a blog post, you have to push it. You have to help amplify it, right? So you have to call on your own social network, ask people to help you share it. Ask people to help, share it on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and see what works, right? You can't, if you overshare things on Facebook or you repeatedly share the same thing on Facebook, it doesn't really help, but you can do it multiple times on Twitter with no problem. So you can try sharing with different kinds of text. Share with an image. Like, you definitely want to make sure there's an eye-catching image involved in your share. If you want to, I think it also comes down to the topic that you choose for that first blog post. If it's just like, hey, we're XYZ widgets company, we're here now, pick up the phone and call us to place your order for widgets, like, nobody's going to care about that. But if you do something that is interesting and engaging with people, tells them something about the world, is intriguing enough that they're going to want to share it, that's going to help you a lot. Another trick is you can write about other people or write about other companies, right? You can interview somebody. You can do an interview, do an interview with Jim Glade about, publicizing your company, right? And then when you publish that, you reach out to Jim and say, hey, Jim, thank you so much for doing that interview. It's here on our site now. Would you help share it to your networks, right? And then you get the benefit of, like, assuming that Jim likes it and he wants to share it, then you get him to share it and you get the benefit of his network getting aware of what you're doing too. So there are a lot of little kind of tricks like that, and just reaching out to people. emailing people, believe it or not, still works for this, right? So if you know you published an interesting infographic about, say, I don't know, big data and artificial intelligence, and you happen to know that, particular reporter at TechCrunch likes to cover big data and artificial intelligence, then send her an email and say, hey, I noticed you cover this topic. We just published an infographic. If you'd like to use it in one of your posts, you're welcome to republish it. Just let us know. Right. And you send out a bunch of emails like that. So that kind of you have to be really ready to work it once you get something out there to help push it.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think that's probably a whole nother topic. Actually, real quick, I wanted to say that I would love to have you back to talk about maybe how small publishers could increase their could grow their websites and stuff like that. I think that'd be very valuable to the mid-level publishers.
Cool. I'll just put in a quick recommendation too for Priceonomics. They do a really good job at content marketing. They do like really interesting kind of thought leadery stuff that's like amazing, facts that they pulled from doing research or from analyzing data. And they're really, really successful at it. They have very shareable blog posts. They published something recently, which was like the Content Marketer's Handbook or something. I forget what it's called exactly. But they have lots of, it's like a gigantic white paper ebook that you can download. But they did a shorter summary of it on their blog too. It's worth checking out because they know what they're talking about. And they have a lot to say about this kind of promotion.
All right, Priceonomics. Thank you.
Priceonomics, yeah.
Priceonomics.
Yeah.
Okay, Priceonomics. Thank you. Last question here from Marcus, which is a pretty good one. If you're a small startup and you're not having luck getting on the big tech blogs like TechCrunch, VentureBeat, do you recommend other places to go in order to get the word out about you?
Product Hunt, for sure. Product Hunt. And then Medium. I think Medium is a really interesting platform because there are a lot of tech people on there. And it's not all tech now anymore either, as it's maturing and getting bigger. But it's a really big group of people who are actually interested in reading things that are longer and they're more thoughtful and in responding to them. And so it's not like it's not a magic pill that'll instantly get you more noticed. But Medium is a great place to build a community and to interact and to start, sharing information. So Medium and Product Hunt are kind of the most interesting to me right now for getting yourself noticed. Okay, cool. Actually, next month we're looking for we're actually going to have a webinar with a Product Hunt moderator, one of the top ones. So I'm looking forward. I need to learn a lot more about that. It is something cool. They have it's like the Product Hunt effect now when it was the TechCrunch effect. And so yeah, it's definitely interesting. All right. Well, Dylan, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time, staying over the time actually. And I hope this was really useful for everybody. I certainly enjoyed it a lot and I hope we can have you back again sometime. All right. My pleasure. And really glad to participate and hope it was helpful to everybody and hope to see you again. All right. Appreciate it. Anybody who's interested, you can visit Tweny.media and you can also visit Publicize.co. We'll be sending everybody who visited the webinar, we'll be sending a link to the recorded webinar as well. So you can go back and check that. So again, thank you guys for attending. And Dylan, a big thanks to you too. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Talk to you later. Bye.